Hello and welcome to A to B Two Sides podcast with your host Joel Geniuk, where we are bridging divine minds to shift us to a divine paradigm. Third time's a charm. I've had two previous channels. My first channel is probably too controversial and got taken down. My second channel is basically too cryptic for people to understand. So I'm trying to create a new channel where I just speak basically layman's terms, or break things down a bit more simply, more simplified for people to understand. So I was meditating earlier. I've been listening to a lot of Dr. Joe Dispenza, and how to been also looking into how to get into different states of consciousness, altered states of consciousness, to access, parts of the subconscious, which is what meditation is. It's designed for, really. Like, we are divine beings with, sorry, my cat's putting me off because he's eating kibbles in the background, but we're sort of, we are multidimensional beings. If you don't know anything about spirituality or any of that sort of thing, you can just think of multidimensionality as simple terms is, one dimension is just one point, which is just like a circle, and then two dimensions is two circles sort of overlapping like a Vesica Pisces. Three is, either, depending on how you look at it, could be a triangle or it could be a square, because when you jump to three dimensions, you also, it creates the fourth dimension, which is space. So you have time and space, or space-time, in those dimensions. And there's many other dimensions beyond that, and we exist in all of them simultaneously, but our awareness is kind of here in the third dimension. So when you're in meditation, when you're in a meditative state, trying to access these altered states of consciousness, you're able to move in and out of dimensions, different dimensional awareness. So the point of meditation is to leave the third and fourth dimensional space-time matrix, so that you can operate your awareness outside of time and space. Now, when you do that, you're able to get what people would call download or epiphanies, or information. Like, when you start to get towards the quantum mind, you start to have a different level of awareness. You're more aware of yourself, or in some cases less aware of your physical self, and more aware of your non-physical self, which is where your awareness comes from. Because to be able to observe light and the information within our realm, you have to be able to observe that from a higher state of consciousness. So that higher state of consciousness that we're observing this reality from is the quantum world, the quantum realm, which is the fifth dimension. So in my altered state of consciousness, I just got into a meditative state and just relaxed and sort of let go and just be. I had this idea to talk about this exact thing, because what I realized was that something that I already knew, but I learned something additional to something that I already knew, which is that, we live in a universe. This uni is one verse, and the Word was God. The Word was with God. So we know everything's made out of energy, and it vibrates at different frequencies. The Earth collectively, the Gaian mind, which the Aborigines call the Dreamtime, the Earth or Gaia is sort of the base frequency for all of creation. It's a bridge between the mind and love. It's a bridge between higher and lower realms. It's a convergence point of all of creation from all the dimensions down to the lower realms, which is what we're in. So our existence as individuals, as we are both a collective, like each person is a cell in a larger organism, which is the Earth, which is also a cell in a larger organism, which is the solar system and the galaxies, and so on and so forth. So each person, even though we can interact with each other in space and time, is actually living an entirely separate life in another timeline, another like parallel reality, you might call it. Now, what I realized in this meditative state is that's actually the multiverse. Each person is a universe. Each person is a fractalized manifestation of God, because we are made in his image. So that means that Gaia, the Earth, and each being is all indicative and part of the multiverse, and is the multiverse. So each person is their own universe, which means that we are multiversal consciousness experiencing itself as separate beings, separate entities at the same time, but in different timelines. And it's hard to explain this in like three-dimensional terms, because it's hard to comprehend how it works. But with the quantum entanglement of each person, each particle, each wave, each event, it's all entangled. It's all within the mind, but it's also without the mind. And it's like in a dream, when you're dreaming about somebody else, like a character in your dream, and you were to look at this person in a mirror, you're looking at their reflection, and they're looking at you, and you're both looking at each other in the mirror. Even though you're looking at them in the mirror and they're looking back at you, you're still looking at yourself, looking back at you, because every character within your dream is you and a projection of your mind, just as we are all projections of each other's consciousness here in this multi-dimensional, multiversal consciousness, collective consciousness that we exist in right now on this planet. Now, Rupert Sheldrake also talks about something called morphogenetic resonance, which I think is a good descriptor of what I'm explaining, because every event, every decision, everything is a wave, and we are transmuting and transferring energy and waves of energy in and out of our system, our bodies, and our environment. So some particular animals, the that are just, living in their intuition and not suppressing it. They already know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes, or within the next few seconds. They have like a precognitive state that they're in, which can happen with humans too. When you go into these different altered states of consciousness, you have like precognition, which there's a term for it. I'll come back to that. But basically, for example, there's a persimmon seed, a farmer's almanac. If you're coming into winter and you get a seed from a persimmon tree and you cut it open, the pre-sprout or the shoot inside the seed, there's 3 different shapes. There's a knife, a fork, and a spoon shape. And depending on the shape of the sprout within the seed, it will tell you what kind of season you're going to have, what kind of winter you're going to have. So if it can already determine that, if it knows you're going to have, heavy snowfall or like light snowfall or frigid cold, if it knows the difference before it even happens, then, that's part of the morphogenetic field, because time flows in both directions, because we're living in a dualistic reality. And we are both very far from God and the beginning. So we are both the beginning and the end. We're in the middle, and we're a bridge between the two. So, they can't really prove gravity exists, or that it's a wave, or, they can't really prove what it is. They still haven't been able to do that. So like my idea and other people's ideas have, come down to density, but also my idea would be that the universe is expanding, but it's also contracting, right? So that's like a push and pull, or electromagnetism. So, gravity could be explained in that way too. It goes both ways. So then if a seed can determine, not necessarily determine, but it like by observing the seed's growth, you can determine what season to expect. Then there's something in that, you know what I mean? Like if the seed's production and its growth is predetermined by the season that's going to happen, then there's definitely something in that. But then if you knew you could control the inside of that seed by controlling weather patterns, you could definitely do that. It's like certain events happen in the outside world, which then are going to trigger humans to make different decisions, which is going to alter the outcome. So you can like have some sort of control over timelines. But that other term that I was thinking of is ESP. You can actually train those skills, like anything that is just a learnable skill, you can train like a muscle. So ESP is something that you can learn. It's not just a psychic gift, but it's something you can learn. And Rupert Sheldrake's research into the morphogenetic resonance, he explains about telepathy and what telepathy is, and that it's just not understood, but it's actually an inherent trait of all of creation. It's obviously to do with quantum entanglement and everything, but I'm not going to go into that. So there was a guy called he's a Silver. I can't remember. Anyway, the creator of Mind Valley, he created it through somebody else's technique called the Silver Technique, and that man had like 10 children, and his children weren't doing well at school, and he decided to see how he could help them improve. And he bridged, I think it was psychology and his understanding of telecommunications, and that there's some sort of resistance in the brain. Like, for example, This is my example. This isn't from him, but I'm just using this as an example. Like, if you have a traumatic experience in regards to studying or something, I could use a really extreme example, but I won't. But if there's some sort of resistance in your mind that's like a fear that's stopping you from learning, then if you can eliminate the resistance, you'll become more proficient at learning. It's just like if you can relax really deeply, you can access this ESP, this extrasensory perception, because you don't have the resistance to the outside world and an outcome. You can then move in the opposite direction and actually see a little bit ahead of what's to come. So this guy figured it out, and he was able to program his children's minds. And one of the extreme examples was with his daughter. I think she was, I don't know how she might have been like 10 or something. He was teaching her the history about presidents of the United States, and before he would even ask her the question about which president, she would give him the answer. And that's how ESP works. It's like precognition. It's getting an answer to something before you even know where it came from. And you can get to that state through relaxation and letting go. And it's an altered state of consciousness. So if time's flowing both ways and we're spending a majority of our time in the waking world, and the waking world is only like 5, max 10% of the collective consciousness, then, what's the dream and what's not, So if we spent more time in the subconscious, we would be able to work through things a lot better. It's like we're asked backwards, like everything's back to front. And it seems like that in this world, that things are a little bit backwards. But you don't really realize until you start to pay attention to the contradictory nature and even like the hypocritical nature of us, We're walking contradictions. And that's why it's so hard to embody our own beliefs, because we are mostly unaware and unconscious of what we're doing, why we're doing it. And that's because we're mostly made up of the ego. And once we break down the ego and become more aware, that's when we can be more ourselves. Because the ego is the identification with this world. It is this world. And although it's a beautiful place, if you're unconscious and acting out of that, you can cause a lot of trouble for yourself. And collectively too. Cause a lot of trouble from our unconscious actions. And sort of the whole idea of this podcast is to compare sides, because really there aren't sides, but there are at the same time. Like, it's an illusion, but, kind of a pretty obvious and extreme example would be the government versus the people, where the government is actually the people and the people are the government, because we're all people. But it's like an us versus them mentality that creates division that's been conditioned into us. For example, like even though we live in a democracy, people sit around and complain about the government. Nothing ever changes. And then the government do all this stuff, but still the system stays relatively the same. There's like a massive breakdown. There's no communication. It's just like the government, we can only guess what goes on, and then they can only guess what goes on with us. No one's really open about what's happening. So the government's like, oh, they're just just peasants, and they're polluting the earth, and it's ultimately their decision what they do, and that we're not here to look after them. And then the people are like, well, we want more responsibilities, we want more independence. But then there's other people that want less responsibility and to be more dependent because they don't really want to take their power back. So it's really like you need to have an open discussion and speak your truth and know where everyone's at. Because even like people that think they're speaking their truth, they may just be repeating like old patterns of behavior or ideologies that have been passed down, and they don't really know who they are because they're not aware, and they're just existing through their ego and just replaying the same old patterns over and over again without even being aware enough to know that they're doing that. They're just repeating patterns and cycles and not actually moving on. So yeah, this is basically just a small taste of what I want to talk about in this podcast. So I'm going to leave it here, and I'm going to set up a new channel. And yeah, I mean, if this information's helpful or it's opened your mind to anything, please give it a like and share the information as well, because all I want to do is just try to eliminate confusion and just have like open discussions about where we're at, collectively, from my perspective, and use what I'm learning in my day-to-day to explore these ideas that other people are also exploring, like I mentioned, Rupert Sheldrake, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I think it's Jose Silva. He's passed on now, but someone else has taken over his work, and he's the founder of Mind Valley. So there's other people too, like about epigenetics. Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, like these people are pioneers and visionaries in this area, talking about how once you can get control of your mind and your awareness and understand your subconscious, you can start to program your reality from a nonlinear state. So yeah, it's kind of like what I'm interested in at the moment, going down that path. So hopefully I can bring that information to you and what I learn. Okay, sending you much love and peace, and take care out there. Till next time.